Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Alex Piñeres. I'm serve as program manager here at Levine Museum of the New South. We're really excited today for you to join us in this special Shaping Charlotte program. We're excited to partner with the School of Good Citizenship in what will be the first of three special Shaping Charlottes around voting rights. We're also excited that today we're going to be sharing a new exhibit that you can see now virtually on our website, Counting Up, What Does Your Ballot Look Like? And we'll talk a little bit more about it later with the School of Good Citizenship and some of the artists whose work is featured. But before we kick off into tonight's conversation, we'll like to hear a few words from our staff historian and civil rights scholar, Dr. Willie Griffin, who will share with us some works about voting rights, both locally and in the region.
Thank you, Alex. Voting has long been viewed by many Americans as one of the most essential rights and privileges of our democratic society. However, gaining the right to vote for every American citizen has been a complicated and protracted struggle. Even now, efforts to suppress the right to vote in many communities across the country persist. In many ways, this protracted fight for voting, representation, and ultimately independence in this country began in Mecklenburg County. In 1775, residents officially resolved to reject the British Parliament's unchecked authority over citizens of the colonies. The sentiments of Mecklenburg citizens spread and ultimately contributed to the American Revolutionary War and the creation of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, one of the most important documents in America. The idea that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with unalienable rights, was indeed revolutionary. Unfortunately, in practice, the rights outlined in this great document excluded over half of the country's residents, including white women and Black people, the majority of whom were enslaved. White women began mass organizing for the right to vote in 1848. After the Civil War, 4 million newly emancipated Black people renewed and joined the fight for voting rights. However, the passage of the 15th Amendment in 1870 only granted the vote for African American men. From 1870 until Union forces withdrew from the South in 1877, African American men had equal voting rights with white men. The withdrawal of the Union resulted in the systemic reestablishment of white male dominance and disfranchisement of African American men across the South. Voting suppression through poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and violent intimidation prevented Blacks from voting and decimated Black representation in state and federal politics. In North Carolina, despite the obstacles, a handful of African Americans continued to exercise the right to vote and were able to consistently keep Black Charlotteans like John Schenck and J.T. Williams in political office between 1868 and 1896. Black women formed clubs in the 1890s that advocated for suffrage to bolster the work of their white counterparts. Local Black women such as Mary Lynch and Mary Jackson McCrory worked tirelessly in Charlotte and across the state to help get the 19th Amendment passed in 1920, which granted Black and white women the right to vote. In the early 1930s, African Americans used their voting power to press for access to improved educational facilities. In 1937, Jackson McCrory became the first Black woman candidate to seek a political office in North Carolina. Martha Evans became the first white woman elected to city council in 1954. The 1965 Voting Rights Act significantly increased the number of voters across or among local African Americans, which resulted in the elections of Fred Alexander to city council that year, Sarah Stevenson to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School Board in 1980, and Harvey Gantt as mayor of Charlotte in 1983. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down a key component of the Voting Rights Act, which has led to more challenges to voting rights. Voter ID laws, partisan gerrymandered legislative maps, and the COVID-19 pandemic are just a few issues influencing access to the ballot in our time. The struggle to protect our central right and privileges continues.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, who will dive in with the folks at the School of Good Citizenship and the artist that we'll be featuring today, Janelle Logan. Many of you know Janelle in our community. Janelle is an independent curator dedicated to supporting artists, transforming communities, and creating accessible creative spaces. She's the executive director of the League of Creative Interventionists and the founder of 300 Arts Project, an arts consulting company that supports community engagement, equity, and diversity in arts via training, strategic planning, and exhibition. So it is my pleasure to introduce Janelle, who will be our moderator for the evening. Good evening, Janelle.
Oh, sorry about that. Good evening. And thank you to everyone who is here. I think we're in for a really interesting and dynamic conversation tonight. One of the things that people have been asking around this project is how can arts really be an opportunity to talk about some of the political and social things that are happening right now. And what I always say is that the arts have always been a platform and always been a vehicle for having some of these conversations, especially tough conversations where there are multiple perspectives, because it allows for an expression of an idea. It creates a space for people to engage in conversation, and even kind of creates an environment for us to consider and contemplate privately and then kind of gather together to have conversation. And so this project, the School of Good Citizenship, definitely does that. But I'm really excited to introduce some of the people that we will be talking to tonight. So Nora Ligorano and Marshall Reese, they are the creators and the artists behind the School of Good Citizenship. Natalie Jones, who is one of the artists who submitted work to the call, and we're really excited to show her work. As an educator, I think it's incredibly important that we think about the multiple hats that people wear and the way where we find artists and creatives in our community. Peri Law is another artist and a printmaker who submitted work and is a part of this exhibition that you can actually see today. And Owens Daniels, who is a photographer, who really, I think, is doing a lot of interesting photography work and kind of manipulating the way that we see and kind of interact with photography. So thank you all for being here tonight. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think we'll start at the beginning with Nora and Marshall, because again, they are the creators of this project. I think the biggest question, and one of the questions we always kind of get, is what is the School of Good Citizenship?
Well, the School of Good Citizenship has quite an amazing history, given that we've just been hit with a pandemic in the middle of forming it. But it always has been, and it continues to be, and is always evolving too, but it is a series of 6 art events, 6 art actions that are aimed at, as you said, providing a platform for artists to give people a voice. And especially in a time when, that is in question. So, and the one thing I wanted to say that in this show, Counting Up, we asked artists to really reflect upon something that we thought was really a difficult mandate in the end. It was just like, what does voting look like?
Mm-hmm.
And we struggled with actually trying to write a description of it. What does the electoral system mean to you? What does voting mean to you? And it's not an easy thing to visualize. And I have to say, you guys and the other artists in the show have come up with really amazing work. And both Marshall and I are really excited about this. So thank you very much, really. I think you really nailed it, actually. So the school actually has a history. It started to develop in the fall of 2018. And we had just come off a big project, which we're going to talk about, which is our history, a little bit about our history. And we were thinking, that was great, but how can we open doors? How can we engage in the community in a way, leave a lasting effect? That was the kind of big question in the air. And we knew that the next election cycle was approaching in 2020. And we really felt like, let's put our efforts, let's go back to Charlotte because we have a little bit of a history, and we're going to talk about that too. Let's go back to Charlotte. Let's focus there, and let's just do some research. So we hit the road in 2019, in May, I guess it was, of 2019, once we did some footwork and did some research and fundraising, et cetera. And we went to Charlotte. It was, I think it was Memorial Day. It was 95 degrees. We thought we were going to do one of our ice pieces in Charlotte, and we were going to make a one-day event. Well, we scrapped that idea because the ice would last for about 3 minutes, and we just thought, no, let's rethink this whole thing.
And Nora, not to interrupt, but can you let people know where you are?
Oh, yes.
Oh, we're in Brooklyn.
You're in Brooklyn, New York.
We're in Brooklyn, New York, and we're in our studio right now. So
in the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Yeah.
So
we're channeling in from there. We started to do, from that, we really started to do research. We traveled down south. We started to meet people, artists, community leaders, museums like the Levine, and educational institutions, et cetera, and started to form partnerships with different institutions, which is now a kind of amazing collaboration that we are really happy to have, and it's allowed us to form a bigger project and expand our audience. And we also met Janelle in July, and asked Janelle to join the team to help us through this, because we don't live in Charlotte. We were coming down from Brooklyn, and we thought, this is Janelle is a curator. She gets it. We don't have to explain what we're trying to do, because we didn't even know what we were trying to do. So, anyway.
So to go back a little bit
A little time travel here.
We share your feelings, Janelle, about like the role of art as a way to bring people in to new discussions, new points of view. I always think that in a way that art is like opening a window or putting a hole through a wall. It reveals something that people don't think about. We started doing work at the conventions in 2008, and I wonder if Alex can show the slide. This was at the on the grounds of the state capitol in St. Paul on the first day of the Republican convention there in 2008. We'd just been to Denver a week before, where we did the same thing in Denver. And on this day, the Republican convention was postponed or canceled because of the hurricane in New Orleans. But nonetheless, it was in the middle of a demonstration, so thousands of people came there. And that's where Nora and I really started to see the impact of doing an artwork like this, or in a public artwork, with so many people around it, and the way it affected people. 4 years later, Alex, we can show that slide. We went to the Democratic Convention in North Carolina, and this is 4th Ward, Marshall Park. The tents in the background that you can see there are the Occupy Charlotte movement. And it was very funny because we were setting up, and we really struggled. This was a very DIY project. We did it on ourselves. We tried to get permitting and all that kind of stuff, and we spent weeks and weeks and weeks doing that. We get there, we got a permit, we get there, we install the ice sculpture, and early in the morning, some of the Occupy people came up to where we were working, convinced that we were Republicans. And we said, well, we're not Republicans. They go, you're melting down the middle class. I go like, well, that's not really what it's about. And so we explained it, and they came away with it.
And they stole our coffee.
And they borrowed our coffee. And then this time around, we were going to do another ice sculpture in a public space, and Alex, if you can show that, called We the People. And it's really, because it became, I mean, we feel that this year is really about how we can coalesce as a group, develop a sense of belonging and understanding around the issues that unite us. And we're in danger of losing it. But what happened is, of course, the coronavirus. And that's why we're in Brooklyn, and we were planning to be in Charlotte all this time. And we realized that we couldn't do a public artwork because it wouldn't be responsible to have people assemble with a health risk. And so then we had to rethink things. And that's how we came, and so that the Counting Up exhibition was one component of like a series of events. Everything's now online.
And so right now, the Light Factory is actually coming to the end of a 7-week or a 7-series workshops that are about, the work is about many different things, but it's really about the voice, and it's really about the voice being heard.
And the images of communities that are not seen.
And the Levine is, of course, launching the show tonight, and Janelle is moderating this panel. There'll be a series of 3 panels around this show. And then next week is going to be I Once Was Lost, but Now Am Found, which is 4 nights of live streaming of spoken word poets and poets from Charlotte area and choirs from all over the country that are going to be doing virtual choirs and interviews with the artists and the artists and the choir directors, and something special afterwards. So it will continue. This event will continue into October with a Civic Saturday closing the entire series, and film screenings as well with working films.
Right.
Great. So thank you for kind of laying a foundation for the project and kind of explaining the journey that it took. And I know that was like a pared down kind of conversation about the project. But I'm really excited to talk to the artists who were involved. And I think that it's a reflection of, in some ways, like the practice of creating these works that then people have to participate in. This is a very participatory process and project. And I'm so glad that the artists who are here, as well as the artists who could not participate tonight, are a part of this exhibition. So I encourage everyone to definitely check out the link and to explore the show and really celebrate your creative neighbors and peers and community and engage in conversation. So with that said, I think we'll start with the order in which we kind of introduced people. But before that, I'm going to ask everyone individual questions based on their work. But I'm curious as to why the 3 of you applied for the call. What was it that attracted you to it? What made you submit? And anyone can jump in at any time. Should I call somebody out? Peri, you go first. Why'd you apply?
So I applied because 2016 was the first time I've ever voted. I had just turned 18, and I was living in a college bubble at the time. I was a freshman at UNC Chapel Hill. So I had a kind of idea of how I thought the election was going to go. And then afterwards, I remember sitting with all my friends in our dorm rooms afterwards, just feeling very disillusioned with the entire kind of voting process. So I pushed everything to the back of my mind for the past couple of years because I didn't really want to deal with what was going on in front of me. So I wanted to respond to this call to force myself to contemplate why I was feeling so disillusioned when I voted for the first time in 2016, and kind of examine what I had learned as a student in high school about voting and gerrymandering and disenfranchisement, and how that's still incredibly relevant now. And I wanted my art piece to address those feelings.
Great. And we're going to see that work in a little bit. Owens, what about you? Because I've seen your work in other contexts, and so it's interesting to see your work here as well.
Yeah, well, I've been voting for quite some time, throughout all of the years, and one thing that has made me enter this contest is the same thing that's been all my life. There's been more than enough sacrifice in my culture, tradition, that regardless of who I vote for, I feel the moral obligation to vote. The issues that face the nation, that's a corporate ideal to me, and as an individual, whether they reflect my values, my vote is the only thing that I get an opportunity to have an input at a particular level where it could sway the course of history one way or the other. The other ideal is I use my what I call visual language to be relevant, to speak for my community or to my community, or in my case, to kind of remind the world that I'm still here and have something to say about now. I like the past. I like what people have done and the shoulders that I stand on. But a show like this gives me another opportunity to be relevant, to speak to what is really important. And is your vote. All the other things are sideline issues. All the other things are just misdirection or misinformation. Your intelligence, your ideal, your perception, what you perceive, all those things come down to you pulling the lever, pushing the button, filling in a dot. And then lastly, as a citizen, I think that you should be obligated to say something, not just soak up, the opportunities that we live in. Whether you see those opportunities good or bad, they're still opportunities. And your voting is an opportunity to remind this country that you count. So therefore your vote should count. And that's why this opportunity came along like everyone else. I created work that would speak to that.
Thank you. And Natalie, for you?
Yes. So as an educator, a couple of years ago, we took a group of seniors, everyone who was over 18, to walk over to the Beatties Ford Library to vote. And it was really moving to be there because I was like, wow, look at all these young people, exercising their right to vote. And it was after I saw the Four Freedoms exhibit at the Gantt Center, I was really moved by Frank Thomas's work and his billboards and, all of the things that he does that pertains to civil liberties and voters' rights. And so I made my two pieces that are in the show. And they're sisters, it's like the first one says freedom and then the other one says vote. So it's like freedom to vote. And being from the South, my dad was president of the local NAACP chapter for a while. So I've always grown up kind of conscious and aware of, things that definitely Black Southerners go to, in addition to, what we go through in the country as a whole. So yeah, lately and I was also a victim of voter suppression during the last presidential election, which was absolutely insane. And so I looked around me and everyone who was having trouble looked like me. So I've just really been kind of working on a series that focuses on voter rights and the Black family.
And actually, Alex, can you pull that image back up? Because if we go to the first photograph, Natalie, this was the source material for the piece that we'll look at in a moment. Can you talk a little bit about that image?
Yes. So one thing that I like to do is collect historic photos of African Americans. And this was actually a postcard. So I don't know like the time frame. I'm guessing like by her dress, it could be like 30s or 40s. But it just reminded me of growing up. I sat on the porch, at my grandmother's house, at my maternal great grandmother's house, my paternal great great grandmother's house. So sitting on a porch is like a pastime in the South. And so I just started thinking about, I wonder, what these people's lives are like. He has on a suit, so, he could be, working somewhere that's not in the field, possibly. And so I thought this would be a good anchor to kind of create a collage piece around freedom and voting.
And then this is the piece, the final piece using the image.
Mhm.
There's a lot of, it seems like very kind of personal elements that are added to the piece. Can you talk to us about your process and why these elements are included and where they came from?
Yeah, so the word freedom, it's actually a blood red color, and that was intentional, just to kind of symbolize the blood that was shared historically um, during the 60s and the civil rights movement, and even today. I mean, we are still seeing blood being shed for just having rights, not even equal rights, just, rights to live and be free in this country. And so I started with the word freedom. And then I started to think about, well, if this photo is from the 30s and the 40s, what things could I add to this piece that would symbolize that time frame? So I added cotton because, we had cotton fields. The cotton fields still exist today, but I just thought the cotton was relevant. I thought historic keys were relevant. I painted the tips in red to symbolize, blood from chains and shackles of slavery. I also included lace and fabrics because of the women who were sewing these fancy dresses that they absolutely could not wear for other people. So I also, the photo on the far right, is dated 1898. It's an original photo, and it's of a little boy sitting in a basket full of cotton. And children are children. They're always children. They don't know. And so he's smiling. I don't know if you guys can get close enough, but he's smiling, and there's just like a sea of cotton behind him. So I thought that maybe, he can be related to these people. And so I really just wanted to incorporate and try to keep the piece relevant to the time frame.
I really appreciate the work and kind of your personal kind of narrative and connection, because one of the things I think that is critically important, and I want to set this now, is that when we talk about voting, we often talk about parties, we often talk about agendas, and we rarely remember that this is insanely personal for every person who votes. And the questions that they ask and the things that they're kind of considering are incredibly personal. And so I think as we're having this conversation, and I thank you for kind of leading the dialogue, is that it's a reminder, right, that we are all kind of approaching this from our perspectives, that it is all of us who kind of come together to make the country what it is. And thank you for sharing about voter suppression and having that experience, because it actually connects, interestingly, with Peri's piece. And that talks about, actually, I don't want to take all of like what you're talking about away. So Peri, why don't you actually just kind of share a little bit about your work? And I think if you can also talk about the printmaking process and why printmaking in relationship to what you're making.
Yeah. So I did two pieces for this. They're both interconnected, and they focus on the two districts, District 4 and District 12, during the 2016 election. And they were incredibly gerrymandered districts in North Carolina that were eventually ruled unconstitutional in a Supreme Court case. But I was kind of drawn to how abstract and surreal that these districts were. And they were the two districts that I could vote in because it's my home Talmadge, Charlotte, and then Chapel Hill, where I actually ended up voting. And I kind of wanted to layer this really surreal kind of looking map that holds so much power over the election process, and really distorted the way that our votes are counted. And I'm a printmaker, so I am drawn to the repetitiveness of printmaking as a kind of meditative process for myself in just creating a piece, but also thinking about it in the way that a singular vote and a singular ballot is kind of layered on top of each other to create like one final choice that we end up having, but also how a single voice can get lost in this overlapping and overweaving of all of our ballots going into the system, and that's how one person gets picked for each position. So.
Thank you. And is there, and it may not, but printmaking has this like property, like this ability to create multiples.
Yeah.
Oh, and thank you for sharing the way that you made the work. I think that's really helpful for people to see. How does that play a role kind of in some of the work that you do? Because I've looked at some of the other work that you create, and there's definitely kind of commentary that's happening in the work. So I'm wondering about that idea that you can like have more than one of these images or these forms. And is that just is there an intention, or do you see some benefit to that in kind of sharing your message?
Yeah. I was thinking back to the history of printmaking and broadsides and like the ephemeral quality that printmaking has, because you can produce so many, a singular one isn't as important. But I like using the process of printmaking and the repetitiveness of it to create a one singular item or an art piece from it. So with those, I can't recreate them again. I used a stencil and like the same stamp over and over again, but the way that they're placed fluctuates every time. So there's kind of a life that's given to them that's not just a single thing printed over and over again. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for that. And then Owens, and then we're going to have like a collective conversation, just putting out there. So Owens, can you talk about your photography? Because you're kind of building on the image. You're not just kind of taking an image and letting that be the end kind of statement. So can you talk about what your work is about?
That's pretty much correct for me. Photography is one of the only mediums that captures the moment. Mm-hmm. An artist who paints something, or somebody who sculptures something, somebody who builds something, they really don't capture the moment like photography does. And there's two different realities in photography. You know, it's the reality in front of the camera. If we all sit in front of this camera now, we all kind of have the reality of seeing each other, but we can also see our environment around us. But there's also a reality inside of the viewfinder that the photographer or the artist sees. And that shifts and changes and gives the artist information as to what is the image. And the people outside, or the world outside, can't see that. So it's kind of an isolated process that you kind of go through. So what I do is I tend to look at my environment and ask myself, like you said, personal questions about voting, social justice, whatever the issue is. And then what do I have to say about it? Not the environment outside of my camera, but what does the environment inside of my camera has to say about this moment? And this particular work spans all the way back to 16, I think it was, here in North Carolina, where we had the HB2 issue about who can go to the toilet and who can't. And what I decided to do was build on this image for years of becoming from the American girl to We the People, with the inspiration of Gordon Parks when he interviewed the Black service worker in the federal building the night he was doing a report. And he had her hold him up, and she was cleaning up. And as homage to him, I created this. But I also built it upon the idea of what do we all look like if we were trans? What do we all look like if we were a different minority? What do we all look like if we were just a different people? And it's built upon the idea that we, the people, look like the people. And you find that in the flag. All of us are Americans. All of us are people. You'll find this in the woman's stance. You'll find it in the broom. There's designs and information that I put in her dress. Little pieces of information that the longer you look at it, the more it becomes apparent that this piece of work has something to say other than someone that's standing there. And for voting, again, it goes back to my heritage. It goes back to my culture. It goes back to the sacrifices. It goes back to my obligation. And it goes back to be very personal. This is not the first time in my life I've ever heard about a vote being suppressed. It's not the first time in my life that one party has a view and another party has a view. I don't take any of that to account. The only thing I take into account is what type of America do I want my children to live in? And I vote my conscience. Whatever party that pricks my conscience, that's the party that I go for. And so that all accumulated into me making this particular piece for this particular time and this particular show.
Thank you. So one of the things that's really important about this project is that we engage local artists, really kind of think about what the local kind of concerns are and building a platform for that. And so as citizens, as residents, and as artists, I think one of the things that I would love to ask you all is to talk a little bit about not just, we've talked about your work, but like what as a community, are you looking at? What are some of the things that we're collectively concerned about, not outside of party, right? But where are spaces that we as citizens are considering? And that's from Brooklyn to Charlotte, because one of the things that's really important is that we might be in different locations, but some of our concerns are collective. And so I'd love to, if you're, just to hear some of the things that you're thinking about, some of the things that are important, some of the things you just want to share. So please, feel free to jump in. Oh, you're muted.
I'm going the wrong icon. No, there's so many things that I think unite us. I think that everybody wants to have a better future. There's so many inequities and inequalities in our society now. I think the last 4 years have really exacerbated them. And I think everybody wants to find a way to change that. I mean, like voting and voting rights are really important. And I think that voting is neglected here. It's like we have such a difference between federal powers and state powers, and voting is done on the state level. So there's all these arguments and controversies over like funding voting. Well, that's really a state thing. So the federal government can make all this money available, but it has to be distributed to the states. Like here in New York, I remember I think it was 2000, the 2000 presidential election. Our polling place was inundated with voters because the machines broke, and so they wanted us to do ballots, absentee ballots, and that was a very consequential election. And all over the country, Florida, New York, and I think that we really need to. I mean, one of the things that unites all of us, no matter what our political persuasion, is really the right to vote, and make sure that this one action that we all share, we can do.
Natalie, Owens, or Peri?
Well, I'll chime in. Since I work with youth, I think it's really important for us to not only tell 18-year-olds that they need to vote, but they need to know why they need to vote. They need to know that they need to vote in all of the elections and not just presidential. They need to know that, local government is important. Now we're talking about defunding the police. We talk about, when are these charges going to be brought against people or, the police officers? Well, I mean, part of that comes into play of who is in position of making these calls. And that comes down to voting. So yeah, I think it's really important for us to really latch on to the young people, explain to them the importance of voting. Of course, they need to know the history of voting. But I don't know, we need, and that's really important too, because all of the movements historically have been led by young people, and we're seeing that right now. So it's really important that we catch these 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds and start having these conversations with them so that when the time comes, they are prepared and they can make the best decisions for them and for the community.
Thank you. Peri, I see you agreeing.
Yeah, I was, thinking about youth voting because I am still a youth voting at this point. And I remember in elementary school, we had fake ballots that we had to fill in and pretend that we were voting like our parents were, and they would give us the stickers for it. So it kind of feels like an abstract process until you physically go in there. And I had a paper ballot, I think, in filling that out. And it's hard to feel how consequential it is when you're just filling something out and someone hands you a sticker afterwards and it's like, you're done and you did it and good job, you voted for the first time. And it's a very interesting process to go through, I think.
And it's great to hear your perspective, I think, because for some of us who have been voting for a while, like we kind of forget that space. And so I love that there's this kind of diversity of like age and experience in the exhibition and in this conversation, because it really kind of reminds us and highlights some of those spaces that we may have become we've either forgotten or become jaded just over time. And so I'm so glad that you are here. And Owens, what do you want to add to the conversation about this?
Yeah, I get to travel a lot. I did a lot of this year stuff with COVID-19, preparing for exhibitions here, a lot of stuff on the social justice stuff from DC, being in bed with BLM for weeks and, traveling back down through shooting all the way back down to North Carolina, that type of thing. And one thing that I've noticed and been observant of is the fact that many times, instead of the apparatus, organization, or individuals educating people as to the issues, they're educating people to the party. And that is something that I would like to see people get away from, because it leaves the individual with one choice. And it also makes them lazy, because it gives you the idea that if I just vote for this party, I've done my civic duty. But the other side of it, like my daughter had the same experience. Her first time voting, her candidate didn't win, and she freaked out. She was in college and she had to have a kitten and a safe space, and she had to do all that. And she just couldn't accept that, oh yeah, your vote counted, but it just didn't count to the degree that you think it counts. And so it was because she never took the time to educate herself to the issue and not the party. And that's where I think the disappointment comes, because again, when I do a lot of shooting and traveling with groups and being these different things, it's a different thing than what you see on TV. It's a different thing than what you hear in a party. Totally, totally different. And what you hear from a particularly young people is just party. You don't hear issues, you hear party. And I've come to understand, because the people or the apparatus around them, when they say vote, they're really saying vote my party, instead of saying to the young person, here's information, go research, go look, figure out for yourself if that's the information for you, or it's another set of information for you. And that's the issue that I have with it. When people say to me, go vote, the person who's telling me is really indicating to me, go vote my party. And I saw that with my daughter, and she just could not accept that her party didn't win, not the issues, her party. And so, that's what I have to add to it.
And it's interesting. There are comments, of course, that are popping up, and two of them kind of talk about this idea of education, and then bringing young people with you to to vote, so that they can see the process. And so I think you're really, all of you are kind of raising kind of important ideas and elements that will, I think in some ways help people think a little bit more about the process of voting, but then also how do we as a community and as a collective kind of strengthen that process again. And so education was something that has popped up a few times on the screen. And I have to say here, so we have about 15 minutes. And so if you are totally invited, all the people who are participating and watching us, to ask questions and to interact with the artists that are here. We don't want this to just be an insular conversation. So we can talk to each other, and that's great. But I think the benefit and the strength of all of this is that we can actually talk to each other, whether you're on screen or off. So I invite you to type in your questions and your comments into your chat mechanism, whether it's Messenger or something else, depending on your platform. And then we will have an opportunity to see those questions and address them. So please do. I wanted to get back to this idea of artists being on kind of the forefront of social, historical, and political change. We've seen that a lot historically, and that was kind of the mission for this project. But I'd love to hear from practicing artists who are local, who are taking on sometimes some challenging issues. How do you see your role as a creative in this kind of social space? Go for it, Owens. I see you reaching.
Okay. I see my role as a voice in my community, eyes and ears of my community, and feelings of my community. And when I say community, I don't necessarily mean around my house in the neighborhood that I live in, but the collective space that I take up and the presence that I take up in any space when I'm around and I'm affected by the very issues that affect everyone else. And like DNA, I'm an artist that produces something within the collective body itself that has something particular to say or something unique to say about that particular issue. Like I said, there's a reality in front of the camera, but a lot of people are not aware of there's a different reality inside of that viewfinder. And it's the thing that's in that viewfinder is what's going to speak to the world itself. And so art has always and will continue to be at the forefront of the conscious and the soul of people. Mm-hmm. It's not politicians, it's not lawmakers, it's not any of that. If you look at art history itself, from a guy who dipped his hand in paint in some cave somewhere and stuck it on the wall until, the great Guernicas of today, it has been artists who have preserved and documented and spoke the heart and the mind and the souls of people. Mm. And so that's how I see my role is to continue to do that.
Thank you. So we have a question, and then Peri, be ready because I'm gonna ask you a question. Braxton Winston asks, how can we use art to better explain the nuanced complexities of government functions so voters feel more educated and confident in their vote? Go for it. It's a great question.
Well, that's a really good question, Braxton. Thank you for answering it. I'm not sure I can or ask it. I'm not sure I can answer it. I just want to say that, you know, like in New York, what's the purpose?
Finkelpearl.
Tom Finkelpearl, who was the head of the Queens Museum and then became the director of the Department of Cultural Affairs, instituted a program in which they had artists have fellowships in various governmental agencies.
In residencies.
In residencies. And I think that that's a really good way to help expand people's perceptions of what government can do for people. I mean, he placed artists all over the city. There's a I don't forget her name, but there's an artist who's done a residency with the sanitation department for, I think, 2 decades.
Yeah.
And, so there's a room. I know, Braxton, you're involved in city government, so I encourage you to like explore the ideas of offering Charlotte artists, you know, a residency in some of the governmental departments. I think that would be a way to expand on this idea.
And also, that kind of thing opens doors that you don't even know exist.
Mm-hmm.
There's many opportunities when you just start pushing a little bit.
So Natalie, as an educator and a creative, how do you see that artists might be able to, and I know this is on the spot, but might be able to kind of help people navigate these systems and better understand these systems? I know, I put you on the spot.
Well, the good thing is that art is a visual medium in most cases. So, and a lot of people really relate to things that they can see, things that are visual. So I think that that's what art has going for it. And of course, I feel like you can't talk about anything that pertains to voting without talking about history. And we look at some of the political art in the past. I mean, whether it's posters, whether it's murals, whether it's graffiti, whether it's a T-shirt, it's definitely a really strong tool to be used to bring attention to certain things that are going on in our society. One thing that I think it happened in Charlotte maybe a couple of years ago, but the Inside Out project with the French photographer JR. And that project is specifically to bring awareness to certain issues that are plaguing our communities. And it's meant to make people feel uncomfortable, to start having these discussions about, you know, whatever the case may be that's happening within, you know, respective societies. So I think that, you know, the possibilities are endless with visual arts as well as music. We're bringing awareness to different things that are happening within the government system.
And I think it's kind of raised the idea that me. Can you hear that? Oh, there we go. Okay, so you kind of raise the idea that this is not a new thing, and that we can look back at not only history but kind of cultural production to see where the arts and kind of politics and history and kind of informing people have already existed. And so it gives us like a history and a legacy to build off of. But, you know, we have with these new technologies and new ways to make, I think it gives a bigger continued platform to do that. And Peri, I wanted to ask you, as a young artist, right, early in your creative career, how do you, and and again, difficult question, but how do you see this kind of practice? Because you're around young people, and we often kind of think about established artists and don't necessarily plug into emerging artists all the time. So where do you see, based on your creative experience, conversations that you've had with your peers, like where do you see this work and creative work going?
I think, well, my recent peers are all college students, and we're always hoping that something better is going to come along and that we're the ones that are going to create that change that we want. So I think we're very hopeful for the future, but at the same time, kind of beaten down by everything that's going on, that it's kind of hard to see how a future may be for us, but we're trying to create it ourselves. And I know for at least my experience, and I think for some of my other friends and peers, is I feel like that I have very little control over the world right now, and in general, because I am a child still trying to figure everything out. And I use art as a way to kind of create control for myself and grasp onto a world that I'm newly coming into. And yeah.
And I mean, that's a powerful, but also a challenging position to be in. And so I thank you for that. So talented Miles, as an artist, he feels it's his responsibility to depict both the past and present issues with society. So I think there's a lot of that kind of happening. And so Peri, for you, I look forward to seeing kind of what you do, and where you and your peers kind of take this kind of next phase of like art and creative process and society, honestly. I know, I love that you said that you are hopeful, and stay that way. Keep it, because we all, like, that's what kind of drives change. So we have 2 minutes, just about. Thank you all. Oh, we can do one more question. All right, we can do one more question. I think that the biggest question in this context, and as people see the show, what are your hopes for people as they look at your work and the work of others that are included in this exhibition, and kind of experience the project, the other elements of the project, as we head towards November? And it might be fair for Nora and Marshall to kind of kick off the response, since this is really kind of your brainchild.
Yeah. We are really looking forward to what happens in North Carolina. And we wanted to do not only, I mean, this was all based on the supposition that there would be a convention in Charlotte at this time. But, as things changed, the meaning of what we were doing or the emphasis changed too. And it became more about providing opportunities for people to have a voice.
Mhm.
And so as we get closer to November, we really want to help people think about how they can affect change in our political system. And one of it's both simple and complicated. But one of the most simple and the most complicated things that we can do is vote. It's a simple action, but the context around it is complicated. And that's our challenge, to make both accessible for everybody.
Well, I think that was like the summary, like right there. That was perfect. So thank you all for being a part of this. This is the beginning of your exhibition, kind of being shared with the world. And so I'm really kind of happy to see the work and to have an opportunity to talk with all of you. And thank you, of course, to Levine for partnering on this project. I think there were a number of opportunities for people to kind of back away from this. And everybody remained committed and really kind of thinking creatively about the process. So thanks to Levine and Alex, thank you for helping us host this conversation tonight.
Well, thank you, Janelle, for moderating the conversation. Nora and Marshall, thank you to the School of Good Citizenship for wanting to partner with the Levine Museum of the New South. And Natalie, Peri, and Owens, thank you for sharing your art with us tonight. I want to remind everyone to be looking out on our website and our social media channels as we announce our upcoming Shaping Charlotte conversation with the School of Good Citizenship in partnership with this exhibit, where we're going to be looking at art and how we're a history museum, but as our staff historian, Dr. Willie Griffin, often said, history is complicated, and we can use different ways to analyze and teach that. And art is one way that we can do that. So I really love how history was very present in each of your artwork today. Natalie, your artwork definitely, and Peri, you were reflecting that on your last election, and Owens, how that piece changed over time with history. So thank you very much. And I also want to remind everyone that while the museum's doors are closed, you can support the museum by testing 243-725, and you can test New South, and we'll appreciate your support. And again, thank you all for joining us tonight. Night.
Night.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Janelle and Peri, Owens, and Natalie.
Good night.